All right, we will start our study. We're in James chapter 5. And one of the things we're working on, too, is trying to keep our time more focused. And so we're going to end at 7:45. And if you need the notes of the outline, they're on ohana.church/live. And you can download blank notes, and you can also download the filled-in copy to figure out what you might have missed as you go along. And we're on page 18 of your notes, and we're on letter number I. We're looking at James chapter 5 and verses 1 through 6. It says, "Go to now, you rich men, weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you." By the way, let me also say that we want you to comment online, ask questions, and get involved. You can look right there, letter I, is what are the three charges given against the rich in verses 4 through 6? And so you can start answering that. And then how does that apply to us today? There's three specific charges against the rich. And then how does that apply to us today? And you'll see that it's a little different for us. And so how would you apply it to your life, the charge against you and I in our use of money? It says in verse 2, "Your riches are corrupt, your garments are moth-eaten, your gold and silver is cankered, and the rest of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. You have heaped up treasures together for the last days. Behold, the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, crieth, and the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. You have lived in pleasure on the earth and been wanton. You have nourished your hearts as in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and killed the just, and he doth not resist you." And so what are, as we look at these in verse 4 through 6, what are the three charges that are given against the rich? And then how would you say we need to apply those today? And so any comments yet on that? I've not given a whole lot of time, but we'll give them a chance to do that. I'll go ahead and answer the first part of the question, but I want you to answer especially the second part. In verse number 4, it says, "Behold, the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, crieth, and the Lord, and the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth." So the first thing is you kept back by fraud. That's the first charge against them. And then verse 5, it says, "You have lived in pleasure on the earth and been wanton." And so they lived in wanton pleasure. And so we want to take a look at that. And then the third one is given in verse number 6. "You have condemned and killed the just, and he doth not resist you." And he's specifically talking to rich have done this. And so those are the three charges against the rich. And as I said last week, you and I, by Bible standards, are rich, because we have so much more than the richest person that day had in our houses, our cars, and our internet, and refrigerators, and running water, and bathrooms, and all the rest of it. We really are rich. And I know most of you wouldn't consider yourself rich. You would consider yourself at the best middle class and probably poor. But we're rich by the standards of the Bible, definitely. And many of us are well-to-do, and even by modern standards, in the sense that we make a good, solid living wage. And so where do we do these things? How do we do that? Because most of us don't have laborers that work for us in the field. And so we can't be accused of committing fraud against those laborers. And I don't think most of you have people that work for you like maids and servants. You may hire somebody to come and take care of your lawn, or you may have workers at work, and it can apply there. But how do you think these things apply to us? So any comments that are shared there yet?
Not quite yet.
Oh, wow. We're not getting comments very fast today. So, and by the way, we really get comments from a select group of people, and we appreciate that and love them and want them definitely to participate. But we'd love to have more of you participate. And if you're watching like on your TV with YouTube, get your phone out and make a comment or two on your through your phone app and get involved. We will never make fun of you, and we appreciate the response and want you to get involved. So I hope that you'll do that more so as well in going there. Okay.
Yeah, so we got one. So Garrett says, "After robbing and defrauding their workers to accumulate their wealth, the rich are indulging themselves in an extravagant lifestyle."
Okay. All right. And if you have other comments, bring them up as we go through that. So I think number one, the one keep back by fraud, I think what is for us, it would apply in not being fair in paying debts. These landowners owed those laborers a decent wage. They were doing work, and they should pay. The laborer is worthy of his hire, and they should be paid what is worth their work. And they were defrauding them by not paying them a reasonable wage. And of course, we've seen that throughout history, whether it's slave labor or taking advantage of the poor. We see that even today, the argument over minimum wage isn't enough to live on, all the rest of that. And I'm not sure the government should raise the minimum wage, but I think we as people ought to pay people what's fair for what they do. And we ought to raise the minimum wage and saying, you do a good job. You deserve a wage that is worthy of that. And so I think when we're not being fair in paying our debts, there's a couple verses here I put down. Jeremiah chapter 22. I think somebody referred to it last week, verse number 13. Jeremiah 22 and verse number 13. Woe unto him that built his house by unrighteousness and his chambers by wrong, that uses his neighbor's services without wages and giveth him not for his work. And so when you owe somebody, whether it's the store you do business in, the restaurant you go to, or whether it's somebody you hire to mow your lawn, or whether or not it's something you put on a charge card, I think you violate this principle when you don't pay your debts. You have a responsibility to take care of those things, and I think you're wrong when you don't. And then Malachi chapter 3 and verse number 5, it says, I will come near to you to judgment. I will be swift witness against the sorcerers and against adulterers and against false swearers and against those that oppress the hireling in his wages, the widow and the fatherless, and that turn aside from the stranger from his right, and fear not me, saith the Lord of hosts. So he puts those that don't pay the rightful wage in the same category as adulterers and sorcerers. And that could include not giving the right tip to the waitress that takes care of you at the restaurant. We ought to be fair. As Christians, we ought to be more than fair. And we want to be generous. We want to be people that are known that you do the work, I'm going to show you that. Now, if you got somebody who didn't do the work right, that's a different matter. But we should pay people for the work that's being done. And as Christians, and I know myself, I've been guilty of this, we want people to do it for free or a discount when that's their living, and we ought to be careful of that. Okay. Now, in that verse in James chapter 5 and verse 4, it talks about you've reaped and are entered into the years of the Lord of Sabbath. And so what is the Lord of Sabbath? And it's not talking about the Sabbath day. So what does the Lord of Sabbath mean? So I want to give a response on there because I don't want to do all the work for you. If I have to come back to it, I will to get you to answer that. You probably have a note in your Bible, or you may have a little dictionary in the back of your Bible, or if you're really fast on Google, you can Google it as well. But what is the Lord of Sabbath, and why does it refer to that? In relation to, hey, pay your laborers what they're worthy, because the ears of the Lord of Sabbath are listening, and God is paying attention here. So I think number one is we should pay on time. I think that when we don't pay on time, we're guilty of this. Leviticus chapter 19 and verse number 13. Leviticus chapter 19. Leviticus, I skipped a book there. Leviticus 19 and verse number 13. Leviticus 19 and verse 13. It says, Thou shalt not defraud thy neighbor, neither rob him. The wages of him that is hired shall not abide with thee all night until the morning. In other words, pay on time. Pay it when it's due. Don't make that person wait for what's rightfully theirs. And we've gotten into a kind of a society that does that. We pay by credit card, so I can buy it today and pay for it 30 days later. And, that may be okay on credit cards, and that's the way the system works. And be careful of that, because sometimes we borrow on tomorrow. We're going back to what James said in chapter 4. We're boasting of tomorrow. We're saying, I'll have 30 days from now, I'll have the money to pay for this thing I'm eating today. And that's not a good thing. But I think to pay on time. Then also Deuteronomy chapter 24 and verses 14 through 15. Deuteronomy chapter 24 and verses 14 to 15. Thou shalt not oppress the hired servant that is poor and needy, whether he be of thy brethren or of thy strangers that are in the land within the gates. At his day thou shalt give him his hire. Neither shall the sun go down upon it, for he is poor, and set his heart upon it, lest he cry against thee unto the Lord, and it be sin unto thee. And so again, we have a responsibility to take care of those things on time and fairly. And we need to be careful in those areas. It almost sounds like socialism. It almost sounds like with some of the things we complain against the government about. The reason the government has to dictate a minimum wage is because people don't pay what's right. The reason that the government has to step in on a lot of these issues is because people are struggling and people aren't doing right by those people. And if we as Christians did things that are right like this, then we would not have a problem. And we wouldn't need our government to step in. And that's why these are things that we should do. I don't want the government to dictate this. I think that's a mistake, because then that creates more problems. But I do think that there is a responsibility that the minimum wage in most places is not enough to live on, especially here in Hawaii. And so there are families that are working on, having to do 2 or 3 jobs just to barely make it. And I don't think that's fair. And when we're getting from them a benefit, we ought to pay them for that. And so I think as Christians, we need to be the leaders in that area.
Yeah. So back to your question about Lord of the Sabbath. Garrett and Stacy both got Lord of Hosts.
Okay.
That one. And then a good comment from Ms. Surface earlier. Fraud is when money is used for an unintended purpose. And when we use what God has given us for selfishness, we commit fraud. What we have belongs to God. We are his stewards. And that's a great way of looking at it, is even in a situation where we have been given wealth through God's blessings, specifically, that is not ours to use how we see fit. It's ours to give back to God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember when I was a kid that I had somebody that gave me money to buy a bike, and I used it to go out and buy something else. And that was fraud, because they gave it to me for a specific person. Now, I could have gone to them and said, can I use it to buy this instead? But I didn't, and that was fraud. And I think we're guilty of these kind of things, that we look at this, well, I'm not one of those, slum landlords, and I'm not one of those guys that has people doing slave labor and child labor and all the rest of it. But we are. And we can do this in our everyday life, just when we don't give that waitress the tip she deserves, or when we don't pay that guy mowing our lawn what he deserves, or the babysitter, or whatever, whoever else it might be. And again, I'm not saying we have to inflate it and pay more than there's certain jobs that are worth more than other jobs. That's the way our society works. There's more value to them. But at the same time, we should not devalue something just because we can.
Yeah.
And we need to be careful in that area. The Lord of Sabbath means Lord of hosts or armies. And usually in the Bible, when that term is used, it denotes judgment. It's the idea of, here's a city that's being surrounded by army that's coming because they rebelled or whatever, and now that army is going to destroy the city and judge them. And so that's the idea. The Lord of hosts, the one who comes in judgment, is the idea of the Lord of Sabbath when you read that in your Bible. And he's also the Lord of hosts in the sense that he is the Lord of everybody, not just the rich. And so he's there for the poor as well, and he's Lord of the hosts, because most people are poor. We're not part of the top 1%. And so we have to realize that. So I think that's the reason why he used that phrase. Never ignore a phrase in the Bible. It's there for a reason. Try to understand why it's there. All right, and then number 2 on the same category of not of keeping back by fraud is we need to just do right. Go to Matthew chapter 20 and verse number 4. Matthew chapter 20 and verse number 4. It says, and said unto them, go ye also in the vineyard, and whatsoever is right I will give you. And they went their way. That's the kind of testimony we should have. Now, this parable is a unique parable, and he did what was right. And when you study it out in detail, you see that even more so. He did what was right. But the point is here, I want to have a testimony that if I ask somebody to come do a job for me, and we haven't figured out exactly what the value of it is, if I say, listen, I'll do right by you, that they know that I will. That I will do right by that person because that's the right thing to do. And that's the kind of attitude that we ought to have in our lives today as well. Okay. Number 2, the second phrase that we looked at was that they lived in wanton pleasure. Okay. And so I want you to define for me the term wanton especially. You can define pleasure if you want, but I think we all know what that means. What does it mean, wanton? And what does the phrase nourish your hearts mean as well? So you can answer those both online there. But this idea is living in selfish extravagance. It's living in selfish extravagance. Luke chapter 12 and verse number 15. Luke 12 and verse number 15. It says, and he said unto them, take heed and beware of covetousness, for a man's life consists not in the abundance of things which he possesses. And the society we live in today, it's all about what do you have? You got to have the newest, the latest, the greatest, the best. And it's all about possessions. And we got to be careful of that. We live in an extravagant society today. And it's not just, again, you see some of the TV programs, the houses of the rich and famous, and they got the gold-plated toilets, and they've got the pools, and they've got the theater rooms, and all the rest of the stuff. And we say, man, that's extravagant. But really, a lot of things that we have are extravagant as well. And are they necessary? Now, I don't think the Bible says we can't have something that's nice. And I don't think the Bible says that we can't have the newest, the latest, and the greatest. But when that becomes our whole focus and that takes priority over everything else, and when we get into wanton, that's where I think the danger is. I love the quote here. It was from probably an Amish guy, I believe. Tell me what thou dost need, and I will tell you how to get along without it. You know, the Amish and the Mennonites, they're famous for living without things that we think are necessary, whether it's electricity or cars or whatever else it is. And he's saying, listen, you think you need it? I can tell you how you can live without it. And we don't need all of what we think we need. There are necessities in life, and then they very quickly turn into more wants than necessities. I need food and water, but I don't need Perrier water, is that what it's called? I don't need to have a steak for every meal. That's a great thing, and I love steaks, and I especially when I get them on a bargain. But at the same time, that's not a necessity. And so we've got to take a look at these things. The word pleasure means soft or luxurious. Soft or luxurious. Luke chapter 16 and verse number 19. Luke chapter 16 and verse number 19. It says, there was a certain rich man which clothed in purple and fine linen and fared sumptuously every day. Same idea. Again, I'm not going to condemn the person that goes out and spends $1,000 or $2,000 or $3,000 on a suit or a dress. But is that really necessary? Do you need the most expensive car, the $100,000 car? Now, again, there's a balance there, and I don't believe necessarily that having nice things is wrong, but I think we've got to be careful that we live for pleasure, and our whole goal is to have a soft, luxurious lifestyle, and often we can't afford it, but even if you can. There are people that go out and buy a $100,000 car, would be like me going out and buy a $1,000 car. It wouldn't affect them at all. They could write the check and it wouldn't even, the car could burn up tomorrow and it wouldn't change their situation at all because they're billionaires or millionaires many times over. But is that necessary? And we really need to ask that question. And I really liked when I was raising support to come here to Hawaii, I'll tell you, sometimes it was frustrating. We'd go to churches to raise support, and the pastor would say, we just don't have enough missions money to support another missionary right now. I'm sorry, we can't take you on. And I understand that a lot of churches are doing everything they possibly can, and they're maxed out. We've been in that situation. But then you'd go to somebody's house, and they've got a boat and snowmobiles and all kinds of new cars and everything else in this beautiful home, and you're thinking, they've got all this, and they can't afford to take on another missionary. Especially when you look at their missions budget, and it's like 10 missionaries for $100 a month. There's something wrong with that picture. And I was talking to one guy one time when we were on the deputation, and he told me this. He said, he had some nice things. And he said, my philosophy is this: if I can afford to buy that boat, I can afford to give that matching amount of money to missions. I like that. What he's saying is, if I want the luxury, I need to pay for that, because there are missionaries out there that don't have the luxury of having the basic needs met. And there are people that need missionaries that don't have the luxury of having a missionary. And he says, if I'm going to enjoy the luxury, and I don't begrudge them that, I don't know if I'd like to have a boat. They're like a hole in the water you put money into. But there are some nice things I'd love to have. But do I need them? And if I do decide, hey, I want this and I can afford it, Why not say, but I can also afford to give that same amount to missions? I just think that's a good way to look at it, and doing that. Any comments at this point you want to share?
Yeah, there are a couple of good ones here. I think what's interesting, before I get to those comments, what you're just talking about, it's not about being guilted into giving. It's an evaluation of where
Right.
our priorities are.
Yes.
If you feel guilted into giving, don't give.
Exactly.
That's the
Yes, I agree
absolute
with
wrong
that.
reason to give.
agree
If
with
you
that.
are giving because you feel guilty, do not give, please. Save us all the frustration. Instead, it's an evaluation of my priorities to say, what am I loving, right? Because it's not that money is not the root of all evil. What does the Bible say? It says the love of money is the root of all evil. For where your heart is, there will your treasure be also.
Mm-hmm.
And when our heart is in the gospel, when our heart is in our salvation and in Jesus Christ, our treasure should be there as well.
Yeah.
So it's just a great way to evaluate.
And that man I was talking to, no way felt guilty. If you
No.
got to talk to him, he just realized, if I can afford this boat, I can give to missions. And if I can't give to missions, I can't afford the boat. And it's just that he was a want to, not a have to. I've known a couple of people over the years that were millionaires and godly Christians. And I know one that he was extravagant. He had a lot of really nice things. He had a nice ring and he had nice cars and stuff like that. But that man gave probably 90% of his income to the Lord. And still with the 10% he had left over, he could still afford those things, and that's what he enjoyed. But he would not hesitate to take that ring off his finger and put it in the offering plate if that's what God led him to do.
Yeah.
And I believe that's the attitude we need to have. So I'm not saying pleasures are wrong. I'm just saying we need to ask, do I really need this? And I think there's a testimony aspect. If I were driving around in a BMW, a brand new BMW, would it change people's point of view of me as a pastor?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so I want to be careful of my testimony as well. And I don't need those things necessarily. Now, the guy that spends his life in his car, he needs a nicer car because he's driving that thing all the time. But, otherwise it's just transportation.
Yeah. So a couple comments here. Jesse pointed out a couple of things. He points out that misused riches damage our character. Mm-hmm. And then also that Abraham was a rich man, but he maintained, despite his riches, he maintained his faith and character.
So was Job and many people in the
Yeah,
Bible.
a lot of examples in the Bible of very wealthy people. JJ said that luxury has a way of ruining character. And we talked about this a little bit last week. A lot of times it tempts us to rely on ourselves and our money and our possessions rather than relying on God.
And we're doing a study on live lighter, love better, and through Ecclesiastes. And that was one of Solomon's problems. I think his money became wanton pleasure.
Yeah.
And he realized that in Ecclesiastes. He said, listen, I blew it. I spent all this money on things that just don't last.
Yeah, and that lines up with JJ's second comment here. It says that, just the idea of giving oneself to pleasure. And that's exactly what happened to Solomon. This is not we're just analyzing this. Solomon says that. I gave myself wholly to pleasure. Mm-hmm. And it was
nothing.
It was completely vain, right? Another comment here was just about our wanton being indulgence, as the idea there. And then our nourished, and I know you're about to get here, but that nourished your heart is the idea of being fattened. And then I like how Garrett put this. He put it really well. He said, a sinful progression of the rich. Hoarding leads to fraud, which leads to self-indulgence. And then the overindulgence leads to the point where they will do anything to sustain their lifestyle.
Oh.
And while absolutely that's anecdotal, and there's plenty of people who don't fall into that same trap, that is a great and obviously biblically supported analyzation of what happens here. Yeah. And then finally, Stacy said, it sounds like the scripture is talking about those that hoard money to the detriment of their workers, going back to the
you got more money than you'll spend a lifetime, or you. I said that, it's not wrong to have nice things, but I'll tell you what, if I walk in your house and you got a gold-plated toilet seat, I'm going to judge you. I'm sorry. I'm going to judge you. There's something wrong with that. That is not necessary. That is not, you can have the padded seat. Okay, I'll give you that one. But you can have what is the thing that got the water?
Is it like the bidet or something?
Bidet or something like that. You can have that. That's okay. But if you have a gold-plated water.
We're poor. We don't even know what it's called.
Yeah. And if you got one of those, I'm sorry. I am judging you. This is where it comes down to. The word wanton means self-gratification, wastefulness. And you see that again in society today, how people are so wasteful. It's all about gratifying me. It's all about what I want. And it's a throwaway society. And, and that's where he says that's wrong. Luke chapter 15, verse 13, and not many days after the younger son gathered all together and took his journey into a far country, and there wasted his substance with riotous living. That's wantonness. And when we do that, we're wrong. And again, we're all guilty of that. Again, we live in a throwaway society. We use things once and toss them in the trash. And I think even that we've got to be careful of. Again, this is where you go into the social issues. A lot of people are a big thing about it. We're throwing all this trash in the garbage and one-time use stuff like straws and plastic cups and all the rest of it. And I'm not the person that says we got to get rid of straws. I like my straw. I'm sorry. And I'll ask for it every restaurant I go. But at the same time, we don't have to be wasteful. And we can be careful. And it's not just for our environment, but it's for just sake of stewardship. In the sake of and again, we can go extreme the other way. If you're my generation, and especially the ones right before me, grew up during the Depression times and during very difficult times. And so a lot of them grew up with a very, they literally used everything and were very skimpy and very careful. And you can go the other extreme with that. But the wantonness is just a wastefulness and the self-gratification. That's the idea. Okay, and then it says back in James, it talks, the other thing is about nourishing our hearts. Go to Proverbs chapter 7. Proverbs chapter 7, and look at verse number 22. Proverbs chapter 7 and verse number 22. Proverbs 7:22, it says, "He goeth after a straight way as an ox goeth to the slaughter, or as a fool to the correction of the stocks." And the idea of nourish your heart is in verse number 5 of James 5. It says, "You have lived in pleasure on the earth and been wanton. You have nourished your hearts as in a day of slaughter." It's being fattened for the slaughter. Because you're going to come to that day. We're going to stand before God. God's going to say, "Why in the world did you need a gold-plated toilet seat? Why did you, God's going to, we're fattening for the slaughter. We're condemning ourselves. And I think that's one of the things that people get more and more fed up with the 1% is because they see these guys and look at what they're doing, what they spend their money on and how they waste it. And I'm struggling. Why should they have, and that's why you get this rebellion against the 1% or the 10% or whatever you want to get the percentage at. So again, I'm not trying to preach a socialism or against capitalism, against being able to enjoy things in life. I'm just saying as Christians, God said, that's not your priority. That's not what's important. And then number 3, to condemn and kill the just. In verse number 6, James chapter 5, "You have condemned and killed the just, and he doth not resist you." Look at chapter 2 and look at verse number 6. It says, "But you have despised the poor. Do not rich men oppress you and draw you before the judgment seats." And so same idea there. So how do we do this? And that's the last question we'll ask tonight, is how do we condemn and kill? I don't think anybody listening right now has killed anybody. So how do we condemn and kill the just? And the just is referring to Christians, and the people that are not doing wrong. So how do we condemn and kill them? So if you want to respond to that, and you can turn over to Galatians chapter 5, and as soon as you got a response there, let me know, in Galatians chapter 5. And you can also ask, what does it mean for the righteous to not resist? Because it says that at the end of that verse 6, and he doth not resist you. So what does that mean as well? So Galatians chapter 5 and verses 14 and 15. Galatians chapter 5, verses 14 and 15. It says, "For all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. But if you bite and devour one another, take heed that you be not consumed one of another." And so how do we as rich, how does a rich person condemn and kill the just? Any thoughts on that? Any comments there?
Yet.
So do you have any thoughts you want to add in there before I go off on my rampage there? So, look, he's got 3 different formats to look at now, so it's a little harder to keep up with all of that too.
Yeah,
but
one comment I got was that we can condemn and kill another Christian's attitude and or their desire to serve the Lord in the way that we act towards them.
Yeah, it's not just a physical killing of somebody, but we can condemn somebody just by our attitude towards them. And you see that with a lot of rich and famous people. They look down on the rest of us as being peons. We don't really know what life is about. And we can kill them in the sense of discouraging them, of not trying. I think this is somewhat what you see in this whole thing with the Black Lives Matters movement. Again, I'm not for them at all. I think there's a lot of problems with that because of things. But there is a legitimate thing that as a society, yes, black people have the opportunity to move up and out. But as a society, we have put a lot of limitations on them by where they live and by what we open up to them and not. And they feel like they're being killed and condemned. And that's why they're so angry. Even people that haven't been, and really when you get down to it, there's less people, black people being killed by police now. Well, so why are they still angry about it? Because one is too many. And I heard a report today that in 4 different major cities, they did studies where police pull over more black people than white people on just normal traffic stops, when they're not the majority in that city. And yet they get pulled over as a ratio more so. And I'm not trying to become socialist here, and I'm not trying to say that they're right, because the whole way they're going about is wrong, but I understand why they feel killed and condemned. They feel like they've got no opportunity. All the rich people, they know the great investments, and they make, the people with money make more money.
Yeah.
I'll never have the chance to do that. The people with the good jobs, they get better jobs. It seems like I've got no opportunity, I've got no chance, because you're going to keep me down in order to keep yourself up. And that's where I think that it talks about here.
Yeah. Some of the comments that came in kind of along the same lines here are, we deprive people of wages for food, so more on the practical side of things, or doing whatever it takes to remain rich. Sometimes when we just simply gossip about another person, it's really pushing them into a difficult position by spending or by spending his way to justice, an example, giving himself an unfair advantage, getting rich off the backs of the poor, by not speaking up or defending when we should. That's a big one. Using your wealth as a weapon and not as a tool with which to build. Sometimes in life we do what we want with God's gifts and choose our outcome and think we know better.
Yeah, I think all those are good aspects. It's just, again, I'm just trying to help you understand that we as Christians, we've caused a lot of these problems, first of all, by not speaking up, and secondly, by not doing the right thing. And we do need to make changes. Not government down changes, because that never works. It's people up changes. And we've got to make changes in some of these areas in our lives as well. So that's what we have to work at. What does it mean for righteousness to not resist? It says that, and he doth not resist you. So any comments on that one there before I read these scriptures and we'll close out? I think we lost one of the cameras.
Yeah, I think we lost one of the cameras. Hopefully that comes back on at some point. One of the comments for the last one real quick is Cassandra said, sometimes being rich makes it harder to love God, and in turn, harder to love others, since we're supposed to love others like ourselves. I think of your illustration that you used a couple months ago now about the sponge, and our love for other people is an outpouring of our love with God, right? That love relationship we have with God. And we don't have a right relationship with God, and we're not experiencing his love and loving him, we cannot properly love other people.
Right. Okay.
And then, that's all the ones for that.
Okay. Matthew 5:39 says, "But I say unto you that you resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also." A lot of times, people who are oppressed can't fight back. They don't have the means or the ability. If I say something back to you, I'm going to lose my job or whatever. But as Christians, we take a lot of abuse. That's what God says. We should be willing to do that. Romans chapter 12 and verse number 19. Romans chapter 12 and verse number 19. It says, "Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath, for it is written, Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord." And then 1 Peter chapter 3 and verses 15 through 17. We'll close with these verses. 1 Peter 3, 15 through 17. "But sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and be ready always to give an answer to every man that asks you a reason of hope that is in you with meekness and fear, having a good conscience, that whereas they speak evil of you as of evildoers, they may be ashamed that falsely accuse your good conversation in Christ. For it is better, if the will of God be so, that you suffer for well-doing than for evil-doing." And throughout the scriptures, God has shown that, he will reward us. We may not get it in this life, but we will get it in the next life. And he will punish those who do the opposite. And so many times as Christian people, we do take abuse. And other people take abuse because they can't fight back. And in those cases, so that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, I was thinking of, as you talk about that, and how especially those that are poor, that are oppressed, lack those opportunities to fight back, to resist. When you look at the Bible, you don't, especially the New Testament, you don't see God advocate for the rich.
Right.
He always advocates for them. We've seen this in James already as well. He always advocates for the poor, the oppressed, right? I think of the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are they that mourn. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness. Right. Blessed are the merciful, the pure in heart, the peacemakers, those that are persecuted. Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you and say all manner of evil against you falsely. God does not promise us physical blessings. He promises us spiritual blessings.
Right.
And so we got to stop looking at riches as blessings from God, and instead look at the peace of God as what he gives us.
And that's what he's trying to tell them here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, too, I would say that Jesus advocated for the poor, but he didn't tell them to rebel. And I think that's what we're seeing today, is now this rebellion and this burning things down and rest of that's wrong, too. I'm not advocating that in any ways that's wrong, but I think that we need to advocate for the poor, and we need to make sure we're not contributing to that problem. And so what am I doing to help not contribute to that problem?
Yeah.
And that's what we have to look at. All right, we are past our 7:45 time, and I said we stop there. Thank you. We'll see you on Sunday. God bless you.